Hello again, book fam. Thus far, all of the videos that I've done have been about books that I really liked. So, some of my favorites, or recommendations, or the books that I'm looking forward to reading. But one kind of video that I really enjoy to watch is about the books that people haven't enjoyed that much, and to hear why specifically people didn't like them. I mean, it's no fun to just, rag on a book or something, but if you didn't like it for particular reasons, I'm interested to know what those reasons are. Before I get into some of the books that I haven't liked, and specifically in this video, I'm going to talk about really popular books or books that I hear talked about a lot on BookTube or Bookstagram. First of all, I just want to say if you really enjoyed any of these books, I'm very glad that you did. That, there's never going to be a one size fits all for anything. That's something I've definitely learned being an English teacher, because we spend a lot of time talking about the books that we're reading or the books that students recommend to me. Like, I've read some of my students' favorite books and really didn't like them. And then, not all of the books that I like are going to suit some of my students' tastes. Specifically, I remember one class where we were talking about genres and saying the things about each genre that we did or didn't like. And of course, I love fantasy. And the biggest thing that I've had students comment on is, oh, I don't like fantasy because it's not real, because that's never going to actually happen. Yeah, that's why I like it. And then vice versa, I don't read a lot of contemporary. I've definitely read contemporary books that I've enjoyed, but I don't find them as exciting because it doesn't appeal to me as much to read about everyday life, because it's just not something that interests me as much. So the exact reason that I might give that I didn't like some of these books might be the very same reason that you like it. That being said, I love to debate about books. So if any of the books that I mention are books that you really liked, I would love for you to tell me all the reasons why you like it, and feel free to just read me to filth about why I'm so wrong about these books. I would love that. I also want to preface this by saying that I'm going to get into spoilers for some of these because I have to tell you the reasons that I didn't like it. All of the books are going to have timestamps, so if any of these are books that you're really looking forward to reading and you don't want it to be spoiled, you can just skip ahead to the next one. The first book I'm going to talk about is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I fell in love with this cover. I'm a big classics reader. I really enjoy classics, so I'm always on the lookout for, a pretty cover, because there's literally dozens of editions of a lot of these books, and I love this cover. Look how gorgeous that is. And specifically, I love that on the back it didn't give a synopsis, but a quote from the book, and I still love this quote. It says, "Beware, I am fearless and therefore powerful." So I was in. I absolutely wanted to read this book, and it's short, so I thought, oh great, this will be another classic that I can read. And this time of year, I see a lot of people recommending it around Halloween. And similarly, I wanted to read it because I don't read a lot of horror. I don't read a ton of sci-fi, and it's often lauded as the first sci-fi novel. Nor do I read thrillers or gothics or anything with much of a spooky vibe. I'm much more of a whimsical, magical, adventure kind of reader. So I went in really expecting this to be more how Frankenstein, and Frankenstein's monster, is portrayed in modern adaptations. One thing that I will say to modern readers going into this book it is very much written in the vernacular of the time. So if you're someone who doesn't enjoy to read, Victorian novels, to read something that's just super, super bogged down in description, you probably won't like this book. Also, if you're expecting it to be scary, probably might not like this book. So Victor Frankenstein was the most boring and annoying protagonist ever. And I don't need to like a protagonist in order to like a book, but oh my god, this guy, what are the decisions that he is making? So he creates this monster with very little forethought, he succeeds doing what he's trying to do. And then is just doesn't know how to handle it. You'd think you would have thought this out a little bit more, right? So the monster comes to life, and he promptly faints. He does a lot of fainting. I've never encountered a character who faints more than Victor Frankenstein. So he faints, the monster escapes, and then for a month or something like that, he just lives in fear of this monster that he has created. He tries to put him out of his mind. He is terrified of this thing that he's done, and yet doesn't want to deal with it at all. So the monster escapes. I feel like I remember him being in bad health or something like that. He just does not want to deal with it. Then we shift over to the monster's perspective. That was a more interesting part of this book. I did like how when he came to life, he wasn't just imbued with all this powers or knowledge or anything. He was kind of like a child. So he runs away to the woods, manages to survive, and starts watching this family who lives in the woods, and through them learns how to speak, learns about, familial bonds, and he starts to really, really care about them. And again, so this is a part I really liked, especially the part where he reveals himself to them and wants nothing more than to be accepted because he cares about them so much and he wants to help them, and they completely reject him. So his feelings and his experience with that and just his absolute and complete loneliness is a really beautiful part of this book. So I did like that. The only problem is it's only about 1/4 of this book. Then we go back to Victor Frankenstein. Again, doesn't want to deal with it. He's living in fear, jumping at every noise, constantly thinking that he sees the monster, and horrible things. And then the monster starts to resent him for creating him and putting him in this position, where he's all alone, no one will accept him, and he just wants to be accepted by his creator. But Victor Frankenstein is too afraid of him. And so then the monster starts to become very resentful, and he wants to hurt Victor Frankenstein, and in order to do that, wants to hurt the people that he loves. And again, Victor Frankenstein isn't dealing with it. He's not talking to anybody. He's not telling anybody, beware, or seeking out the monster to try to talk to him. No, he's just lives in fear. And then, of course, the people that he loves start to be hurt. And then he resents the monster even more. And now he's okay, now I'll never accept him. Until finally the last person that Victor Frankenstein cares about, his fiancée, is ultimately, I'm pretty sure it ends with her being killed or threatened. And the monster says to him, listen, I will leave you alone. I will never darken your doorstep again. I just need one companion. I need one person in this world who will accept me and love me. So please make me a companion. Make me my bride. Make me a partner. If you won't be that person to love me, then do the same thing you did with me. You created me. And Frankenstein refuses. And of course that is like a hard position to be in, because now he believes that the monster is evil. He can't see any good in him. I just found it to be so like that part, I'm explaining it as like as if it was like good. Those two things are the only good parts of this book, because most of the time it's just completely frustrating watching Victor Frankenstein stumble about, being terrified and fainting every 5 seconds, and not dealing with the mess that he has created. Okay, the next book I want to talk about is The Duke and I, which was the book that Bridgerton is based on, and I decided to read it after watching the show Bridgerton, which I enjoyed. It's fun. I have like critiques of the Bridgerton show. I remember when I first was like 10 minutes into it, like, this is not real, like, this is really over the top, but got more into it and just had a lot of fun with it. If you just let yourself be carried away with Bridgerton, you'll have a good time. I try not to look at it with too critical of an eye, but I don't read much like just pure romance. So I thought, I enjoyed Bridgerton, maybe I'll read the book. I borrowed it from the library. All of the fun is taken out of it. So it just focuses on Simon and Daphne. Daphne's a very different character in the book. She's much more... She's like a mix between herself in the show and Eloise. So the Daphne in the book isn't super interested in like getting married. She wants to, mostly because she just like wants to get it over with or something, and men aren't interested in her. That's a big thing. Men aren't interested in her because she's the best friend, because she's the girl that you're friends with, not the girl you fall in love with. And then Simon comes and he kind of has like this outside perspective and outside view of her. Yeah, it was much more basic. All the brothers aren't as fun. Again, it's really just focusing on Simon and Daphne, so we don't get any of the little like side storylines. We don't really get to know about any of the other characters, especially not like Eloise isn't in it. The Featheringtons are barely in it, you know, just as a little like butt of humor. Yeah, it was just really basic, really boring. Yeah. That's why I didn't like it, that we have, you know, none of the charm of Bridgerton in this book. Not necessarily a super well-known and popular book amongst just like, you know, people that I know in life, but one that is very popular on BookTube and Bookstagram within the book community is Piranesi by Suzanna Clarke. Suzanna Clarke is also the author of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, a book that I really had been considering buying and reading. It's a big chunker, but then she came out with Piranesi and it was really short. So I thought, okay, like I'll read this one, and if I like her writing, I'll go for it and I'll buy Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I am very glad I did that, because I did not like her writing at all. People keep saying like how cool it was and how different, and yeah, it was really different, just not my kind of different. So the things that really kept me from getting into this book were more the stylistic choices. So if you don't know about the book Piranesi, it is about a man called Piranesi who exists in this kind of weird parallel world almost. So he's in this giant house that's like a labyrinth. The halls and rooms continuously go on and on and on. They're filled with things like statues, and in some there's the ocean. In the lower levels there's the ocean, and the upper levels the sky, and it's basically him this is the only existence he knows and remembers, even though he is a fully grown man. He didn't grow up here, but this is all he's ever really known. And then there's another mysterious figure called the Other, because he's the only other person who exists there. And we're told the narrative through, Piranesi's very disjointed consciousness. He's obviously not in a completely rational mental state. And then because of that, again, the stylistic choices come into play. So anything that's associated with the house, which he views as like on a godlike level, and I think for that reason, anything associated with it is capitalized. So if he says the statue in a sentence, even if that word statue is in the middle of the sentence, it will be capitalized. The wall, the hallway, the ceiling, anything, like the doorway. And because of that, it made for a very, very disjointed reading experience where, as I'm reading through a sentence, it makes me read it differently. The same way that if something's in italics, you're emphasizing it. So for me, every single time I would get to a word that was capitalized, I couldn't just breeze over it. It brought me out for the tiniest second. And this happens multiple times in a sentence. So that was just too much for me. So I hated that. And then another thing that a lot of other people would really enjoy about this book, but I didn't, was the really metaphysical, philosophical bend to it. About this, kind of parallel world, about this existence, about his, disjointed consciousness. I found it really, really hard to connect with him because, his consciousness was so disjointed. I think for that reason, some people find him a really, really sympathetic character, but it just didn't do anything for me. Another book that I read specifically because I saw people online talking about it, and this was a few years ago now, is The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. I don't read a ton of YA, and when I do, it's usually fantasy. But this book sounded so fun to me and sounded so different. And the problem I think I had with it was that I went into it with the wrong expectations. So I will read the summary for this book because herein lies the problem. So it says, Henry Montague was born and bred to be a gentleman, but he was never one to be tamed. The finest boarding schools in England and the constant disapproval of his father haven't been able to curb any of his roguish passions, not for gambling halls, late nights spent with a bottle of spirits, or waking up in the arms of women or men. But as Monty embarks on his grand tour of Europe, his quest for a life filled with pleasure and vice is in danger of coming to an end. Not only does his father expect him to take over the family estate upon his return, but Monty is also nursing an impossible crush on his best friend and traveling companion, Percy. Still, it isn't in Monty's nature, to give up. Even with his younger sister Felicity in tow, he vows to make this year-long escapade one last hedonistic hurrah and flirt with Percy from Paris to Rome. But when one of Monty's reckless decisions turns their trip abroad into a harrowing manhunt that spans across Europe, it calls into question everything he knows, including his relationship with the boy he adores. So I went into this thinking, okay, great, this is going to be a fun LGBT, story. I enjoy historical fiction, especially from this time period. Pretty much any historical fiction that's not set during World War II. And the world tour. So this was something that was really common amongst the aristocracy, especially in England, that after college, you would take a year to travel the world, aka mostly Western Europe, but sometimes slightly farther into Europe. Yes, and so I thought this sounds so fun. and everything that people had said about it was mostly like focusing on the romance, about like what a fun character Monty is. That's barely what the book is about. Like, that's what the start of the book is about. That's the setup. And then, you know, that last line of the summary, but then it's a harrowing manhunt. That's the whole book. So they start the tour. They've barely started it. And then they start going on this, you know, crazy quest to find like a magical, I don't remember what it was, but it was a magical item of some kind that could help Percy, the boy that he loves, with his health, because he suffers from seizures. He's epileptic, which there was no treatment for it at the time, and could sometimes be a death sentence. He definitely wasn't, if it was discovered that he was epileptic, he wouldn't be like a fit member of society. So again, also kind of like cool that they're, you know, bringing that historical element into it, and it could be a good, you know, story element between the two of them. But yeah, then it suddenly turns into this weird magical realism thing, which I love magical realism, but I was not prepped for that. That they're going to try to find this like magical item that the whole time as I was reading, I was thinking, it's not going to be real, right? Like, this book was not marketed as a like fantasy-esque book. It's just going to be, that's going to be a problem that they encounter. But no, it does actually exist, and they spend the whole book trying to get it. And I hated that. I hated going in with like such false pretenses of what it was going to be about, and I felt really cheated out of the thing that I was most excited about, which was the tour. I had never read a book about that before, and I thought it was really fun and exciting, and I wanted it to focus more on the romance as opposed to this like adventure, which again is supposed to be what I'm into, but I just felt very cheated. Another book that I read because of the book community was Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets. Yes, the Secrets of the Universe. I never know if it's secrets or mysteries. As you can see, this is a very, very awarded book. I'm not saying that I hated this book. I just didn't like it as much as everybody else. Again, I was really excited that it was an LGBTQ+ book. Super into that. And was open to the fact that, like, that it was more contemporary. Because, I don't know, just something about this cover and the title made me feel like it would be more fantastical, like almost that there might be like some sci-fi elements or magical realism. I wasn't going in with like high expectations of that, but I did think it would be a little bit more, I don't know, like maybe a little bit more whimsical in nature, which it wasn't. I did like it, but there were certain things that this author did that just struck a chord with me. I really don't like it when authors repeat the same phrases and words over and over again. One, not used in this book, but that fantasy writers I find do a lot is the word marrow. They love that word. That's like a hot button word. So to say like, oh, she felt it in her marrow. But then they use it over and over again. I read this book years ago. I don't remember exactly what some of the words were. I just vividly remember that there were times as I was reading that I would stop and be like, oh my God, like, can you find a different expression? Can you find a different way to say that? Another thing that this book does that irked me was a character would say something that wasn't really funny, and then the author would just write, and then they burst out laughing. And it made me think of watching cartoons or anime, and the characters will all start being like, ha 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 ha, and like they'll just keep laughing at something that's not funny. They managed to do it in a book. So that was something that really annoyed me about this one. Another little thing that this book did, or I should say that the author did, that I didn't like was very frequently someone would say something and then the other character would repeat it, but for no reason. Like, almost just, like, to check, oh, did you say that? I don't know, there didn't seem to be a reason. Like, it happened, again, so frequently that it really took me out of the story. Like, why do you keep having them repeat the words that these characters say? Yeah, so I just found that kind of annoying. So this book, again, didn't hate it, gave it 3 stars, but just didn't love it as much as everybody else did. Finally, not one specific book, but I would like to give a honorable or maybe dishonorable mention to 2 book series that I just don't like as much as everybody else does. And both of them are, children to middle grade-esque. So the first one being the Chronicles of Narnia. I didn't read these books as a kid. I read the first one, I guess I was 24, maybe? And thought, like, it would be a really good foundation for fantasy reading. I was doing a magical, world building course during my master's, and we read The Magician's Nephew and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And they were fine. And I could definitely see how other fantasy had been influenced by it, but I didn't have a super enjoyable time reading it. I found a lot of things just went very unexplained, especially in The Magician's Nephew. And then I had bought, like, the box sets. They were really cheap, and they're all, like, these little books, and I thought, like, I'll read them all. Still haven't read them all. I have 2 more to read, right? I read To the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Yes, because Prince Caspian's before that. And the funny thing is I know a lot of people's least favorite book in this series is The Horse and His Boy. I liked that one. I thought that one was one of the better ones in the series, and people don't really like it because it doesn't feature the main Pevensey children. But I found it much more creative and much more enjoyable. Some problems that I have with the Chronicles of Narnia. Describing a place as being, like, vast and this, like, huge land, and yet people manage to travel across it on foot in, like, a couple days. It's not a vast territory. I mean, look at The Lord of the Rings. People always talk about Tolkien and C.S. Lewis together because they were peers. Like, it took them months and months and months and months to travel across Middle Earth by foot. And like, things would get in the way, they'd have to, like, backtrack, and they broke up, and, like, they're having to go in all these different directions. Not so with C.S. Lewis. Another thing that he did that I found frustrating was, like, coincidences and things just, like, materializing and happening. I just found it to be much too easy and a cop-out, and I think that a fantasy writer would not get away with that in this day and age, but because he is one of, like, the forefathers of the genre, it's just accepted. And finally, the big problem I have with the Chronicles of Narnia is the expectation that just because it's children reading it, that there needs to be very little explanation or reason behind anything that's happening. So I remember very frustratingly in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, they come across an island, and Lucy, and it says this in the book, because she is a child and, just, like, has childish whims, said, oh, pull the boat over, I'm gonna walk across the island and you can pick me up on the other side of it. And, of course, only the main characters are like, oh, that sounds nice, we'll go with her. And, of course, they get kidnapped on the island. Like, could you not have thought of a better way? Like, could you have been less lazy with your decisions? And this happens a lot in the books. It's just like a character's whim, or, you know, she just decided to walk over there because, yeah, why not? I expect more. And just because you're writing to children doesn't mean you have to dumb things down, and that you don't have to explain things or come up with like make reasonable decisions for your characters. This one I think I'm gonna get a lot of shit for. I am currently working my way through the Percy Jackson series. I don't hate it. I don't love it. I love Greek mythology, and I love a story that has Greek influence. One of the reasons that I read Piranesi was because the cover looked very, very Greek mythology influenced, and it wasn't really. And my favorite book of all time is Circe by Madeline Miller, and I love Song of Achilles. So I love, love, love the incorporation of Greek mythology into stories. Percy Jackson, on the other hand, is just a little bit too kitschy for me, and this is, again, as a more adult reader reading it, I think it would be really fun as a younger reader to look at these like Greek gods or these figures from mythology and have them be something more relatable or often funny. I didn't like it. I didn't like these super powerful creatures or, you know, figures that I have like such an appreciation for and like a reverence for, to be dumbed down to these like foolish characters, you know, like the Fates, who are like taxi drivers, or the one that I hated was in the second book, Titan's Curse, I believe. They're trying to get to the island of the Cyclops. This one was very influenced by the Odyssey, and they're traveling through the pass. I forget what it's called, but you have Skyla, and then I won't even attempt to say the name of the creature that lives in the whirlpool. So there's the creature that lives up in the cliffs, and then the creature that lives in the whirlpool, and you have to travel between it. And when they were describing the creature in the whirlpool, that when you look down into the whirlpool, you can see all the wreckage from other ships. And then they see the creature, and it's mostly like a mouth. And instead of being something that was like scary or intimidating, they said that there was like all this metal from ships in its mouth, so it looked like the creature had braces. What? Like, why? And even Camp Half-Blood, like things like having Dionysus be drinking Diet Coke all the time, and that he's being punished there because he's, you know, the god of wine, and he's, you know, being forced to stay sober. It's just, I think it's hard to take something like Greek mythology and make it palatable for children, because so much of it involves, you know, violence, tyranny, and sex. Which again, like we kind of breeze over the fact that all of the kids at Camp Half-Blood are half-bloods from, you know, Greek gods. So how do you get kids? These Greek gods are out banging everybody, and that's where all their kids come from. And we're kind of just meant to be like, that's besides the point. But it's not. And so just, yeah, I think it's harder for me as an adult reader who didn't grow up reading the books to set aside some of the more childish aspects of it, because I am someone who enjoys Greek mythology, but in a purer form. So if you really enjoyed any of these books, I would love to hear about it. Or if maybe you agree with me and you didn't like them either. Also, if there's any really popular books that you didn't like, I would love to hear about it in the comments and maybe have a conversation if I did like them.